I still remember the first time I heard about the place. It was a late evening, the kind of night where silence seems to sit heavier in the air and shadows creep further into every corner. They say the national parks are wild and beautiful, untouched by man, places that have somehow resisted the mark of time. People go there to escape, to lose themselves in the vastness of nature, and to reconnect with something ancient and pure. Before I go deeper into the story, welcome, and make sure to subscribe to the channel, Echoes of Nightmares, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on any of the future scary tales. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button too. Now, back to my story. But there's one corner of those forests where the trees grow taller, where the air feels thicker, and where people, good people, experienced hikers, rangers, even families on weekend trips, have simply disappeared without a trace. I remember the stories, the whispers among locals, the strange patterns in the disappearances, details that were rarely shared outside small-town circles. It was the kind of thing that sounded like urban legend, passed down to scare children or to keep tourists from wandering too far off the trails. But the deeper I looked, the more I realized these weren't just stories. These were real cases. There were names, faces, dates, and each one left a haunting gap, an open wound that no search party, no investigation could fully close. The park rangers spoke of nights where they heard things, strange, distant sounds in the dark, an almost human voice that would call out from somewhere deep in the woods, only to fade away into the silence. The odd thing was, it seemed like the forest never truly slept. The sounds would return, sometimes closer, sometimes almost whispering in their ears as if it knew they were listening. So I decided to go. I wanted to see for myself, to understand if these stories were simply the product of isolation, of wilderness-induced fear, or if there was something else out there, hiding just beyond what the eye can see. I planned my trip carefully, told friends where I'd be, gathered maps, supplies, even carried a notebook where I could record anything out of the ordinary. I thought I'd be prepared, but nothing could have readied me for what I encountered in those woods. Now, as the rain falls around me, and I sit here recounting the events of that night, I feel a chill that goes far beyond the cold. You see, it's one thing to hear these tales, but it's another to feel them. When you're alone, miles from help, and the dark is closing in all around you. And as I stepped onto that forest path and took my first steps into the wilderness, I had no idea what waited for me beyond the trees. This is that story, a story of what I found and what found me. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun was already beginning to dip behind the mountains. The light was slipping away, casting long, stretching shadows across the path. This particular part of the forest was quiet, too quiet, with none of the usual sounds of chattering birds or rustling animals. The trees grew thicker here, their branches stretching high above, forming a dense canopy that blocked out what little light remained. There was a strange calm to the air, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. I made my way down the narrow trail, my boots crunching on the gravel and wet leaves beneath me. With each step, I felt myself being swallowed up by the forest, leaving the safety and familiarity of the main trails far behind. The path was faint, barely visible in some places, overgrown with tangled roots and moss. This was one of those trails that didn't appear on most maps, a path forgotten over time, leading to places few had ventured in years. It was exactly what I'd been searching for, complete solitude, miles from civilization, surrounded by nature and nothing else. But as the last light of day faded, A peculiar feeling began to creep over me. It was subtle at first, just an odd prickling at the back of my neck, as if I were being watched. I shook it off as nothing, maybe a trick of the dimming light or my mind adjusting to the quiet. Yet, as I pressed on, that feeling only grew stronger, settling deep within me like a slow, creeping dread. The trail began to narrow, weaving between towering trees that seemed to close in on all sides, as if the forest itself were alive, shifting and breathing around me. I could hear the soft rustling of leaves overhead, a faint breeze that came and went without warning, almost like a whisper in the dark. Every now and then, the wind would die down, and in the silence, I thought I heard something else, a distant sound, like the crunch of footsteps far off the path. But each time I stopped to listen, there was nothing, just silence and shadows. The forest animals, usually so lively at dusk, were nowhere to be found. I realized then that I hadn't seen a single bird, heard a single rustle of movement other than my own since entering these woods. It was as if every creature knew something I didn't, something that kept them hidden, silent, watching from the dark. The rain began to fall a bit harder, a steady rhythm against the leaves, and I could hear it dripping down from the canopy, pattering softly onto the forest floor. The air grew heavy with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves, a mix of freshness and something older, something that had been left undisturbed for a long, long time. I continued down the trail, feeling my heart beat a little faster, though I couldn't place why. The trees around me seemed to stretch taller and darker, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Their trunks were covered in thick moss, some so gnarled and ancient they looked as though they'd stood here for centuries, untouched by time. Shadows danced in every corner, moving with the faintest breeze, blurring the line between reality and imagination. At one point, I caught a flicker of movement just out of the corner of my eye, a dark shape slipping between the trees, too quick and too silent to be anything real. I froze, my breath hitching, staring into the darkness where I thought I'd seen something. But again, there was nothing, just the gentle sound of rain and the faint, distant rumble of thunder. I tried to shake off the feeling, forcing myself to keep moving, telling myself it was just nerves. After all, this was exactly what I'd wanted, wasn't it? To be alone in the heart of the wilderness, to experience that raw, unfiltered connection with nature. But the deeper I went, the harder it became to convince myself of that. There was something off about this place, something I couldn't quite put into words. The kind of feeling that sits heavy in your chest like a weight pressing down, making each breath a little harder, each step a little slower. As twilight turned to night, the forest seemed to change around me. The trees loomed closer, the path became harder to see, and that sense of unease, of being watched, grew stronger with each passing moment. It was as though the forest itself was aware of me, of every movement, every sound. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something else was moving just beyond the reach of my flashlight, hidden in the shadows, waiting. I tried to push the thought from my mind, focusing instead on the sound of my footsteps, the rain, the faint wind rustling through the trees. But that feeling of dread lingered, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts, whispering to me that I was being watched, that I wasn't supposed to be here. As I moved further along the path, the world around me seemed to fade into a dark, timeless silence. The rain had softened, reduced now to a quiet whisper against the leaves. Yet the air felt heavy, pressing down on me like the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. It was the sort of silence that pulls every hair on the back of your neck to attention, where even the smallest sound seems amplified in the stillness. That's when I heard it, a faint, barely audible whisper, drifting from somewhere deep in the woods. At first, I thought it must have been the wind, a trick of my own restless mind, playing on my nerves. But as I stood there, straining to hear, the sound came again, soft, steady, just on the edge of hearing. It was unlike anything I'd heard before, a low murmur that seemed to rise and fall like someone speaking just beyond my line of sight. And yet, it was close, too close, as if whatever it was wanted me to know it was there, lurking somewhere in the darkness, waiting. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was nothing more than the sounds of the forest settling, the trees creaking under their own ancient weight. But as I turned to continue down the path, I caught a glimpse of something, a shape, a shadow, shifting just at the edge of my vision. It was gone before I could focus, slipping back into the darkness like smoke, leaving nothing but the vague, unsettling impression that I wasn't alone. I stood frozen for a moment, my eyes scanning the darkened forest, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The beam of my flashlight flickered across the trees, illuminating nothing but twisted branches and endless shadows. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that the mind plays tricks, especially in the dark, especially when you're alone. But the feeling stayed with me, a creeping sensation that seemed to settle in my bones like the cold. I pressed on, each step slower than the last, my senses heightened, attuned to every sound, every flicker of movement in the trees around me. The forest felt different now, almost hostile, as if it were aware of me, as if it had been waiting for me all along. The whispers came again, clearer this time, rising from the shadows like voices carried on the wind, speaking in tones too soft to understand, but loud enough to chill my blood. Then, just ahead on the trail, I saw it again, a shadow, more distinct this time, standing motionless among the trees. It was a tall, dark figure, barely visible in the gloom, yet unmistakably there watching. I stopped in my tracks, my flashlight trained on the spot where it stood, but the figure didn't move. It just stared, its outline blurred in the dim light, like something that didn't quite belong in this world. A shiver ran through me, and for a brief, panicked moment, I thought of turning back, of retracing my steps and abandoning this isolated trail. But something kept me rooted to the spot, a morbid curiosity perhaps, or the stubborn disbelief that I was really seeing what I thought I was seeing. I took a cautious step forward, my flashlight illuminating the shadowed trees, the darkened path, the empty silence where the figure had been. But it was gone, just like that. No sound, no movement, only the lingering dread that seemed to hang in the air, thick and suffocating. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I scanned the trees, half expecting it to appear again, somewhere deeper in the woods, hidden just beyond the reach of my light. And then I heard it, a single footstep, slow and deliberate, crunching in the leaves just behind me. My heart pounded, each beat a thunderous echo in the silence as I turned, flashlight trembling in my grip, its beam cutting through the dark. But there was nothing there, just the forest, the endless shadows, and that unshakable feeling that I was no longer alone. I took a shaky breath, forcing myself to keep moving, to put distance between myself and whatever was lurking in the trees. But with each step, the whispers seemed to follow, growing louder, closer, as if they were moving with me, drawing nearer with every heartbeat. The rain began to fall harder again, and the sound of it masked everything else, creating an eerie, distorted rhythm that filled the air. If you were in this forest alone, would you stay? Would you press on? Or turn back? Comment below. I'd like to know what you'd do if you were standing here, listening to the whispers with shadows closing in on all sides. I don't know what kept me going. Every instinct told me to turn back, to leave this place. But I pressed on, drawn by a mixture of fear and something else, a curiosity that bordered on obsession. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in around me, closing tighter with each step, and though I couldn't see anything, I could feel it. There was something out there, hidden in the shadows, watching me, tracking my every move. The further I went, the stranger everything became. The trees seemed to grow taller, their branches twisting in unnatural shapes, clawing at the sky as if reaching for something beyond their grasp. Shadows pooled in every corner, stretching out from the trees like tendrils, creeping along the ground, drawing closer and closer. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, heavy with the scent of wet earth and something else, a faint, metallic smell that lingered just beneath the surface, like rusted iron or old blood. I slowed my pace, listening, my senses heightened, every sound amplified in the silence. The rain had picked up again, a steady drumbeat against the leaves, masking all but the faintest noises. And yet, in between the drops, I could hear things, small, almost imperceptible sounds that set my nerves on edge. A soft shuffle in the underbrush, the snap of a twig, a quiet murmur that seemed to drift in and out of the rain. Then came the whispers, low, indistinct, like voices carried on the wind, shifting and blending with the sound of the rain. They were impossible to understand, a strange, unintelligible murmur that seemed to come from all directions at once. I strained to listen, but the words slipped through my grasp, elusive and haunting, leaving only the unsettling impression that they were speaking about me. I stopped, standing motionless in the middle of the trail, my flashlight casting a thin beam through the darkness. The forest was still, almost unnaturally so, and for a moment I allowed myself to hope that maybe it was just my imagination, that the isolation and the darkness were playing tricks on my mind. But as I stood there, straining to hear, the whispers grew louder, closer, as if whoever, or whatever, was out there had noticed my hesitation and was drawing nearer. A chill ran through me, and I tightened my grip on the flashlight, feeling a prickling sensation crawl up my spine, like invisible fingers tracing along my skin. I took a step back, then another, my pulse racing as I scanned the darkness, half expecting to see a figure emerge from the trees, a shape lurking just beyond the reach of the light. But there was nothing, only shadows stretching deeper into the woods, hiding whatever secrets lay beyond. The rain grew heavier, each drop sounding like the beat of a drum in the silence, and thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, an ominous, rolling sound that seemed to echo through the trees. I took another step, then froze as I heard it, a distinct, heavy footstep, louder than the rain, echoing just off the trail. It was close, too close, and as I turned to face the sound, my flashlight caught a glimpse of movement, a dark shape slipping behind a tree, disappearing into the shadows. My heart pounded, each beat thundering in my chest as I stood there, unable to move, my eyes fixed on the spot where the figure had been. I felt an overwhelming urge to turn and run, but something held me in place, a paralyzing dread that kept me rooted to the spot, my mind racing with thoughts of what could be hiding just beyond my sight. And then, from somewhere deep in the darkness, I heard it, a low, drawn-out breath, like the exhale of something old, something that had been waiting for a very long time. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing, just the wind, the rain, the sounds of the forest at night. But as I turned to continue down the trail, the whispers began again, louder this time, clearer, as if they were calling to me, beckoning me deeper into the woods. I quickened my pace, my footsteps echoing in the silence, the rain blurring everything around me, each drop a distortion that seemed to pull me further into the darkness. With each step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, more intense, like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. The trees loomed larger, their branches twisting together in tangled webs overhead, blocking out what little light remained, casting everything in an unnatural, oppressive darkness. The path itself seemed to change, narrowing, twisting in ways that made no sense, leading me deeper and deeper into a maze of shadows and silence. At one point, I stopped to catch my breath, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling over me. But as I stood there, I felt a presence. It was faint at first, just a sensation of prickling at the back of my neck, but it grew stronger, more palpable, until I could almost feel it, something standing behind me, watching, waiting. I turned slowly, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, illuminating the trees, the empty trail, the endless shadows stretching in every direction. But there was nothing, no sign of movement, no sound other than the rain and my own shaky breath. Yet, even as I told myself I was alone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, just beyond the reach of the light, hidden in the shadows, watching me, following me. The trail wound deeper into the forest, twisting and turning through thick underbrush, until I found myself in a small clearing I hadn't expected. My flashlight swept across the space, illuminating scattered remnants of what looked like an old campsite. It was quiet, eerily so, and for a moment, all I could do was stare, trying to process what I was seeing. There was a fire pit in the center, cold and dark, the charred remains of wood barely visible in the dim light. Around it, a few pieces of clothing lay scattered, torn and frayed, as if they'd been left in a hurry, or abandoned after something terrible had happened here. The rain had soaked through everything, but the sight was unmistakable. Backpacks overturned, blankets tossed aside, footprints half buried in the mud. It looked as if whoever had been here had left in a panic, or been forced to leave. I moved closer, my heart pounding as my flashlight caught a glint of something lying near the fire pit. A small, worn leather journal, its pages damp and frayed from exposure. Carefully, I picked it up, feeling the cold leather beneath my fingers, the faint impression of the person who had held it last. I hesitated, a chill creeping down my spine as I opened the cover, revealing page after page filled with hurried, shaky handwriting. The entries started off innocently enough, descriptions of the park, of the peace and solitude the writer had hoped to find here. But as I flipped through, the tone changed. The writing grew more erratic, the words scribbled hastily, almost frantically, as if the writer had been desperate to get their thoughts down, to leave behind a record or a warning. Day 3, something's not right here. It started with sounds, faint at first, like whispers on the wind, too soft to understand. But last night, I saw something, a shadow watching from the trees. It's been following me, keeping just out of sight. I'm not alone here. A shiver ran through me as I read, the words echoing my own experience, the same whispers, the the same sense of being watched. I turned the page, my hands shaking as I read on. Day 5. I tried to leave, but every path leads me back to this place, as if the forest itself won't let me go. I hear footsteps at night, coming closer, circling my tent. Sometimes I can almost make out a figure standing just beyond the firelight. It doesn't move, doesn't speak. It just waits. My pulse quickened, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized that whoever had written this had been trapped here, unable to escape. The entries grew shorter, more fragmented, each one filled with a mounting sense of dread, a terror that seemed to seep from the pages themselves. Day 7. I'm running out of food. The shadows are closing in. It's watching me now, always watching. I can feel it, waiting for me to give in, to make a mistake. If anyone finds this, please leave. Don't let it follow you. If you found this journal, would you keep reading? Would you search for answers? Or would you leave before it's too late? As I continued through the journal, my heartbeat echoed in my ears, sinking with the downpour around me. The rain had grown fierce, pounding the ground, drowning out every other sound except for the whispers. They were louder now, not faint and distant like before. These were close, too close, and growing more insistent, mingling with the words on the pages as if they were meant just for me. The entries became even more frantic, scrawled in barely legible handwriting, each one filled with an escalating fear. They spoke of footsteps in the night, of shadows moving closer, of a feeling of being hunted by something unseen. And then, without warning, they just stopped. The final entry, written in shaky, desperate script, read, "I don't know if anyone will ever find this. It's here with me watching. If you're reading this, please don't make the same mistake I did. Don't look back. Don't follow the whispers. It wants you to listen, to trust it, but it's a trap, a lie. If you hear it, run." As I lowered the journal, a flash of lightning lit up the clearing, casting stark shadows across the twisted trees. And in that brief instant, I saw it, a figure, standing at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the shadows. My heart stopped as I stared, barely daring to breathe. The figure was motionless, cloaked in darkness, just watching me. I blinked, and another flash of lightning revealed nothing but empty space. The rain intensified, coming down in sheets, turning the ground to mud, but I could still feel it. That presence, that same gaze I'd felt since I entered the park. It was there, lingering just beyond the reach of my light, waiting. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a primal instinct telling me to run, to get as far away from this place as I could. I turned to leave, my flashlight barely cutting through the rain, my footsteps sinking into the mud as I retraced my path back to the trail. But the whispers followed, louder now, growing with each step I took. They seemed to surround me, coming from all directions, voices murmuring just out of reach, filling the air with a cold, hollow sound that made my skin crawl. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in short gasps, my pulse racing as the forest closed in around me. Then, in the silence between thunderclaps, I heard it, footsteps, soft and steady, following me down the trail. They were too deliberate to be an echo, too close to ignore. I glanced over my shoulder, my flashlight catching the briefest glimpse of something moving in the darkness, a shape slipping between the trees, always just out of sight. I broke into a run, my feet slipping in the mud, my flashlight bouncing in my grip as I stumbled down the path. The footsteps grew louder, closer, matching my every move, closing in with an unnatural, relentless pace. My chest tightened as I pushed forward, desperate to escape, to put distance between myself and whatever was following me. I thought I could outrun it, that if I moved fast enough, I could lose it in the darkness. But with every step, it felt like the shadows were closing in, drawing me deeper into their embrace, pulling me away from any chance of escape. The whispers were everywhere now, swirling around me, a constant, unsettling murmur that seemed to penetrate my mind, filling it with a growing sense of despair. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the path ahead, and for a split second, I saw it clearer than ever. A figure, tall and thin, its face obscured, standing directly in my path, unmoving, waiting. I skidded to a halt, heart pounding, my flashlight trembling in my hand as I aimed it at the figure. But in the next flash, it was gone, as if it had never been there. I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't let me go, that it would follow me as long as I stayed in its forest, trapped by the rain, by the night, by whatever curse held this place. It wanted something, wanted me to see it, to understand, but at what cost? If you were in this forest right now, with something like this following you, what would you do? Would you turn and face it, or keep running? I didn't wait to see if it was still there. I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the soaked earth, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tore through the forest. The whispers faded behind me, swallowed by the storm, but I could feel it, a presence, closing in, relentless and unseen, pressing me forward as I stumbled and slipped on the muddy trail. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat a reminder of how close it was, of how narrow the gap between me and whatever had followed me into this place had become. The rain blinded me, pouring into my eyes, filling my vision with a cold, stinging blur. My only guide was the faint glow of my flashlight, flickering as I sprinted, lighting the twisted path ahead just enough to keep me moving forward, to keep me from looking back. With every step, the forest seemed to close in tighter, branches clawing at me, roots rising from the ground, as if the earth itself was trying to hold me back, to pull me down. Thunder roared overhead, shaking the air, drowning out all sound but my own labored breathing and the pounding of my footsteps. For a brief moment, I thought I'd lost it, that the storm, the darkness, the chaos had thrown it off my trail. But then, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, steady, deliberate, moving with a purpose that filled me with an unspeakable dread. They were louder now, closer than ever, matching my pace, matching the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, every muscle screaming for relief, but I couldn't stop. Not now, not when I was so close. Through the sheets of rain, I could see it, a faint glow, a break in the trees that signaled the park entrance, my escape. Relief flooded over me, a momentary, desperate hope that I might make it out, that I might leave this place behind and never look back. I surged forward, my pace frantic, driven by the sight of freedom just within reach. But then in the roar of the storm, in the chaos of my own ragged breathing, I heard it, a whisper, louder than before, close enough that I could feel the chill of it against my ear. It was clear, unmistakable, a voice as cold as the rain, as relentless as the storm. Leaving so soon? I stumbled, my heart freezing in my chest, the finality of the words rooting me in place for a split second. I could feel it now, something behind me, just out of sight, so close that I could feel its presence like a shadow, watching, waiting. I wanted to scream, to turn and confront it, but something deep within me held me back. An instinct, a warning that I couldn't ignore. With one last burst of strength, I lunged forward, the park entrance looming before me, the rain crashing around me, masking the footsteps, the whispers, the dread that clung to me like a second skin. And as I crossed the threshold, leaving the forest behind, I felt it fade, the presence slipping away, retreating back into the darkness. But even as I left the park, even as I reached the safety of my car, soaked and shaking, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching, hidden in the shadows, waiting. And as I drove away, I heard it again, faint, almost a memory, a whisper carried on the wind. See you soon? When I left that park, I thought I'd left it all behind. The whispers, the footsteps, the shadows that seemed to follow me. I told myself it was just the storm, the darkness playing tricks on my mind. I told myself I was safe. But as the days passed, that night in the forest clung to me like a shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, that something had followed me out. I tried to explain it to people, friends, family, but every time I was met with disbelief, polite nods, or half smiles that only deepened the feeling of isolation. No one believed me. No one wanted to believe that something like that could happen, that something out there was beyond explanation. Then one night, just as I was beginning to convince myself that maybe it was all in my head, I found something waiting for me. A small, damp note lying on my doorstep. There was no envelope, no explanation, nothing to suggest where it came from. Just a single, rain-soaked piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly, dread pooling in the pit of my stomach as I saw the handwriting. The same shaky, desperate scrawl from the journal in the forest, the same hand that had written those final words of warning. I could barely make out the words, blurred by water, but the message was clear. It knows you're here. It knows you left, but it doesn't forget. I felt my breath catch, the chill of those words seeping into my bones. My mind raced, every instinct telling me to burn it, to throw it away, to forget it ever existed. But no matter how many times I read those words, no matter how many times I turned the note over in my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching, waiting, somewhere just beyond sight. So now I'm left with questions I can't answer, mysteries I can't solve. Was it all in my mind? A trick of the rain? The shadows? Or was there something real? Something out there in the forest that doesn't let go, that waits for those who dare to cross its path? And if it was real, who or what left that note? Was it a warning? A threat? Or something far, far worse? If you found a note like that, would you return to the park to uncover the truth? Or would you let the mystery stay hidden? Let me know in the comments if you dare.